Good morning, and welcome to Sunday SoulDay, weekly fuel for your mind, body, and soul. Today we have Nick Klingensmith, a four-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic, recovering alcoholic who became an obstacle course racer and marathon runner and defied it all. Now he's inspiring sales teams and leaders to unleash their warrior-like mindset, enhancing mental endurance, and achieving success in sales by overcoming self-sabotage, fears, and excuses. Welcome to Sunday SoulDay, Nick.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are too. Good morning, Allie. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning, Demisha. Good morning, Nick. We're so excited to have you on.
Excellent. I'm in the right place.
Well, your background, I know you and I had a beautiful conversation, is just extraordinary. And I could not wait to have this conversation for our viewers and our audience. Like, just you're so incredible in what you've done. I mean, I'm just even starting with the medals behind you. I don't know if we can zoom in there, but he has like an insane amount of medals behind him. So I definitely want to get started just on your journey, like starting with you battling cancer 4 times, managing type 1 diabetes, and then overcoming addiction to then starting your first obstacle course. Like, tell us about that journey.
I like to bounce around a little, so I'm going to start with this. It was on a Friday afternoon in October of 2016 when my boss walked into my office and he looks at me and he says, "Hey, I want to do a Spartan race and I want you to do it with me." And I looked up at him and I said, "No, no, fuck no. No way. An 8 to 10 mile trail race with obstacles? What are you, out of your mind?" I had no interest in being that uncomfortable. And I went home that night and I thought about it and I started to reflect back because for the last 11 years, I had just been taking a beating from the universe. And it didn't even start with cancer, but that's where I'm going to start. In 2005, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was something I hadn't even heard of before, and I was told that I have it. As far as cancers go, that's kind of the one you want because the treatment well, it's surgery. They have to remove the thyroid. They have to give you some sort of treatment after, which for me was radioactive iodine, which is just a pill. It's not radiation. It's not chemo. Um, and then you have to take pills for the rest of your life because you don't have a thyroid anymore. And your thyroid regulates, I don't know, your metabolism and, well, everything. So um, that was in 2005. And the thing I struggled with back then was I wanted a definitive answer for how does this end? Like, all right, so we get surgery, we get treatment. When am I getting it all clear? When am I getting the thing where I can get that sign and say, I beat cancer? And I wish I hadn't asked that question. So about a year later, I moved to Florida and I continued to just follow up with various medical things. I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. I began sleeping with a CPAP at 26 years old. I tore my shoulder playing beach volleyball. I played competitive beach volleyball for 20 years and I had pretty comprehensive surgery. But as a result of that surgery, I had nerve damage. Um, Not long after that, I started losing weight. I lost 60 pounds in 2 months. I lost weight over Thanksgiving. I weighed 153 pounds. I looked like a kid wearing his dad's suit. And that's when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at just 27 years old. And that's when I asked the question I wish I hadn't, which is, when am I going to have enough of this? Haven't I been through enough already? Well, just a few months later, as I was following up with my endocrinologist, and that's when I was diagnosed with cancer for the second time. The crazy part is it was thyroid cancer, even though I was told that I didn't have a thyroid. And so they did surgery again, and we found out that I had a half a thyroid left. They only took half the first time. I'm not really sure where the miscommunication actually happened. I was living in a different state at this point, and the doctor who had diagnosed me originally had left his practice and was gone. So we went forth. They took out the rest of the thyroid, but things went smoother this time. The surgery was smoother. I didn't have the same recovery, and I was ready to start, living my life. And I thought that maybe I was going to get a reprieve from the universe, but the universe wasn't quite done with me yet. My sister of 25 years old killed herself, and as tough as that was, I had stopped drinking when I became diabetic. drinking wasn't a huge part of my life at that particular moment. And I was intent on managing my diabetes. I didn't want to, I just didn't want to be a patient. I didn't want to be a victim to it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to be a good diabetic. I'm going to own this. And so I put the bottle down. But after my sister died, I was drinking with a few of my friends and nothing bad happened. The floor didn't fall out from under me. My blood sugars didn't go crazy. And all of a sudden I was able to spend the next several years learning how to drink with diabetes. And so by the time I got divorced, my first divorce around 2009, 2010, there really wasn't much left for me to do but drink. And I was well into the throes of my alcoholism when I got another injury from beach volleyball. And this time I tore my hip and I'd have yet another surgery. And I was putting on weight. I was about 230 pounds. And I just continued to drink and exhibit selfish behavior and just keep digging the hole. And then an amazing thing happened to me. I was diagnosed with cancer for the third time, thyroid cancer for the third time. So here's what's interesting. The first time I got it, I was scared. It's cancer. You don't know anything. Most people who don't know about cancer, they hear it for the first time. All they really know is chemo and death. But once you've been touched with cancer, you realize it's everywhere. Everybody knows somebody with it. It's almost like you can't throw a rock without finding somebody who has it. So the second time I got it, though, I was angry. Like I was mad at the world for the fact that these things kept happening to me. But the third time I was relieved, because here's the part of the story I hadn't told you yet, is my drinking had really begun to hit critical mass where people were annoying me about it. And so I had decided I was going to stop drinking because I didn't want to hear any more of their nonsense. It was their problem, not mine. But now all of a sudden I got cancer again, only this time they told me they couldn't operate. There was a tumor behind my vocal cords. This was 11 years ago and it's still there. And they told me that they couldn't take it out without greater risk. Now, this isn't like saying I had an operable lung cancer, okay? They're like, listen, that tumor is probably going to sit there for the rest of your life. It won't grow very aggressively. And if it does, we'll act. Not a big deal. But that didn't matter to me. All I heard were the words inoperable cancer, which meant bottoms up, because who was going to mess with me? Who was going to tell me that I couldn't drink when all of a sudden I'm like, well, I have inoperable cancer and everybody was going to leave me alone. It really was a gift, though, because what ended up happening from there is because I took the gloves off and alcohol had its way with me, it was only a couple of months later until I hit my bottom, which I found myself in the floor of a Las Vegas hotel, surrounded by security, surrounded by cops, and they were telling me that I had to leave because I had been in a fight. And I don't remember that. But here's what I do remember is not long before that, I was trying to have sex with a hooker in a broom closet down the hallway from the room that my girlfriend was sleeping in.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, real winner moment right there. And so I had to wake her up and spin some nonsense story about how we were being thrown out and it was all bullshit. And when we found a new hotel several hours later. When my head hit the pillow, I said out loud, I don't want to live this way anymore. I hated who I was. And I had hated who I was for a very long time. And so I got thrown out of the hotel. I was supposed to be a presenter at a conference the next day. And I had to fly back to Tampa, head down. Everybody knew that I was supposed to be there and everybody knew that I wasn't. There was nowhere for me to hide. And that was a very good thing because I was able to make a decision to save my life. And my dad's got 40 years of sobriety. And I called him as soon as I landed back in Tampa. And I expected him to be mad at me. And he says to me, he looks up and wow, okay, sorry, train of thought. I expected him to be mad at me, and instead he goes, oh, thank God, we've been waiting for you. And it was just such a relief. I was immediately accepted. Like here I was thinking I was going to be ostracized in all aspects of my life. And though I hit bottom, I didn't hit a rock bottom because I didn't lose my girlfriend. I didn't lose my home. I didn't lose my job. I was actually able to salvage my self-respect by starting a journey of recovery. And for the next 2 years, that's what happened is I was clearing away the wreckage. I was being a better person and just starting to see the world differently. And then I got cancer again for the fourth time. This time was different though. I was getting a massage on a Thursday afternoon and she was feeling around the back of my head. And all of a sudden she goes, hey, what's that? And I just knew. And I was already going to Moffitt Cancer Center for my regular checkups. And I was like, hey, while you're back there, will you ultrasound that too? And they were like, They weren't used to somebody ordering off the menu. But they did it anyway, and sure enough, it confirmed cancer, or it confirmed a nodule, or whatever. And they did a couple of biopsies, which ultimately confirmed cancer, and then they took that out. The difference between this time and the other times, if you think about it, in 2005, I wanted an all clear, which was never going to happen. In 2013, I'm told that I am literally going to live with cancer. In 2016, they took out the tumor and said, we're done. Like, I had an all clear back there, anyways. I had not had an all clear. And that's when I found out in my life, I actually just had this empty blank space for the first time ever. And I was lost. And that's when my boss walked into my office. And that's when I realized that night that I already was uncomfortable. I had been through so much already, but I had not overcome my adversity. I had only survived it.
Mm.
I was still in the fire. And I'm going to out myself now, because when we talk about mindset and the journey, I was a victim of everything I just talked about. There's nothing heroic about what I just told you about. I just got through it. I just let the world keep hitting me and hitting me and hitting me. And then all of a sudden, I was presented with this option to change my life by making changes. And that's when I discovered obstacle course racing. And that was 7 years, 97 Spartan races, 6 major marathons, and about 50 or 60 other obstacle course, 5K, 10K sufferfests later.
Oh my gosh. First, I love that you call them Sufferfest. That is amazing. Okay, like recapping all of that is just, I mean, from type 1 diabetes to just even you being an athlete and experiencing injury, as an athlete is enough trauma, and enough like trying to adjust and figure out who you are, after you kind of part ways with your athletics. Then getting thyroid cancer, not once, but twice, your divorce. I mean, we talk about a divorce. I mean, even that feels like a death, then the actual death of your sister, then getting cancer a third time. Like, I mean, it's like life just kept hitting you. But I love how you put it, how you were really in survival mode. And I think a lot of people live in that kind of survival mode where they're almost a victim of it, but they're just going through it, but they're not, or they're just not even going through it. They're because to me, going through it is actually thriving and making it, but it's like, but they're just surviving it, they're like on the wheel, and for you to then make that shift, and thank goodness for your boss, like coming in and saying, do you want to do this race with me? And you're like, no, absolutely not, but then you still did it, so wow, like I'm still blown away by everything. And this is the second time I've heard this. So I was just reliving it all with you. It's amazing. But tell us, like, were you like, because you were a leader during that time, leading teams. What was your mindset like during that time period? Like while you were going through all these things, like I couldn't imagine, working, leading a team and inspiring others, because that's really what we do as leaders.
This is the person you're talking to right now is not the same person who was leading those teams. And because all the lessons that I learned, right? Obstacle course racing itself was the vehicle. It was not the lesson. The lessons came from after. The lessons came from continuously going through the fire. It was writing my book through the fire. It was, if you want to get through it, you got to go through it. And the lessons are when you are able to get through it. So throughout that time, I always thought I was this tough, really tough, resilient, gritty, blue collar, chip on his shoulder, just whatever. And that's what, I was validated by that, because people would hear my story and the things I've been through, and they would continuously tell me that too. But again, it's not true. And here's why. I was a victim. It's a victim mindset. And for a while, a victim mindset can be helpful. It can, because you need these. We need the armor. Sometimes we need the fuel. Sometimes we need the weaponry. Sometimes we just need that thing that makes us a little bit gritty. But if you're you against the world all the time, you can't feel that way unless you're a victim of the world. And so when I was going through all that, I thought I was tough because I wouldn't talk about it. I thought I wasn't letting it interfere with my day to day. And I think about one time actually where I kind of lost my shit in a meeting, and I had maybe 5 or 6 different managers working for me. And some were newer, some had been working with me for a long time. And one kind of hung back after, and I looked at him and I said, I'm sick, right? And he was like, yeah, like I love that he knew all along, but he didn't say anything because he knew I didn't want to say anything. And then I looked at him and I said, can you make sure those guys know? Because I wasn't my best just now. And I'm glad I was able to recognize that moment.
Yeah.
But for every one you recognize, there's 10 you don't. And when you live as a victim, you justify your behavior, you justify your bad behavior. It's so easy to convince yourself that you're not hurting other people. So where it helped me was that it gave me laser focus, because I didn't want to work on these things. I didn't want to focus on them. I didn't want to think about it, right? Like I didn't want to be a patient. The very first thing I do when I go to the cancer doctor and I'm checking out, the very first thing, I pull off that wristband right away, because I don't want to feel like a patient. I don't want to feel like a victim. So the thing I did do well then was it helped me to focus, and I worked around the clock. When I had my second surgery and I left and I literally got out of the hospital, I went directly home and sat down on the computer. I loved what I did and I was into it, and I didn't want to let these other things distract me. The downside of it is you can pretend. There's something I like to say all the time, which is the expression is embrace the suck, but embracing the suck does not mean ignoring it. And when you ignore the fact that things are hard, like you just can't lie to yourself that much. Your subconscious knows that all these are going on and they're weighing on you. So the fact is that I was not willing to be vulnerable. I was not willing to be open. I was not willing to ask for help. So even though I was able to achieve some things and through sheer grit, I was not a good leader during those times.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I mean, you hit so many things there. I mean, just from the victim mindset. And I think a lot of times we believe the stories we tell ourselves, like if we say it enough, we start to really believe it, and it starts to become our reality when really we're just pretending, and it's really the difference in living in fear and love. And when you're living in love, you're living presently, you're being honest, you're being open, you're being vulnerable. When you're in fear, and that's really what it sounds like you were in, fear from all the things, not sharing, not telling, not really like owning the fact that you were sick, it's just, it's so, I've seen it so many times with leaders, where they're living in that state, even without having all the things that you've been through, So I love that you were so open now, just sharing that you really had a victim mindset and you weren't a great leader during the time. Wow.
I mean, there are skills, right, that you're able to get things done still. And
Yeah.
how many times in my life I said I want to give up? I don't know, I've lost count. But since I can't actually define what giving up means,
Wow.
I'll just keep showing up.
Good, Nick. Yeah.
Like, what does giving up mean? I'm not going to get out of bed tomorrow? No, of course I am. You still have responsibilities. Dog needs to get walked. I need food. You're going to go through the motions anyway. So if you give up mentally, your life does suck because you just decided it's going to suck.
Thank you, Nick, for walking us through some of your personal struggles. One thing that stood out to me was your dad's reaction when you told him what was going on. And I think people don't quite get it unless they've had their own struggles with addiction, because as an outside person, the natural response is to get angry at someone. Like, why are you doing this to yourself, and not understanding the disease of addiction? And so many people struggle with alcohol and substance use or abuse disorders. And you've already shared a little bit about your experience, but can you share about your strength and hope around alcohol, and maybe one thing that you would tell an audience member who is suffering today in silence with substances?
My first, no, it wasn't my first. It was my third. Yeah, there's no, I already messed up, but I'm going to say it anyway then. It was my first meeting. It was actually my third meeting. And, there was a guy there, and he commented to me and he said, I can go anywhere and I can do anything except drink alcohol. And I look back at my dad, who at times was barely had a place to live sometimes. He highs and lows of his career, highs and lows of everything. You know, we lost our home to foreclosure 20 years ago. He's been the happiest guy that I know forever. And there's an expression in the program, you know, if you want what we have, well, I wanted what he had. And so the experience, strength, and hope is here is this. I have been sober now for almost 10 years. There have been 3 times, maybe 4, that the thought of a drink, of wanting a drink, popped into my head. And in those times, I left, and I could leave because I had a car, because I could drive, because I was sober, because I could make decisions for myself, and I was not a slave to alcohol or any other sort of addiction. So the thing is this, a lot of people struggle with their addiction and not getting out of that fire because they don't recognize that the problem is not just about the substance in their hand. That's number one, right? Number two, they just can't see a life without it. And so here's the piece of advice is there is nothing in the world I can't do. I threw a beer Olympics tournament at my house a year after I got sober. I can go to happy hour. I buy rounds for people. I'm not suggesting someone else how they live. I am just telling you how I'm able to live. I can go anywhere, do anything, be with anyone. And when these bad feelings do creep up, because I've got 10 years of sobriety, I'm starting to actually get in touch with some of my emotions here at 44 years old. I leave. So back in November, October, I actually was I injured myself in a race. And, you know, this was literally 2 weeks after I lost my job. I'm starting my new career here. I'm putting a lot of metaphors on this race. Like this was supposed to be a big deal for me. 12 miles into a 30-mile race, and I strained my hamstring. It felt like I might as well have torn my leg off. It was horrible. And I'm a stubborn son of a bitch. So I'm rationalizing, how can I get through this? And I'm like, all right, because I've done it before. I've been injured in a race. I broke a rib and I still made it 5 more miles throughout the race and finished it. But this time I'm like, it took me an hour just to get to a place where I could hitchhike out of there. So I was like, okay, we're done. And thing is, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. My flight wasn't until 7 or 8 p.m. the next day. And I'm staying in the middle of nowhere, Texas, at a Red Roof Inn or some place where you don't want to hold up for 30 hours. I couldn't walk. So my thought went to one place only, which is, how else can I spend this time? Go to a bar. So I did the next best thing. I went to my hotel, I grabbed my bag, I drove directly to the airport, and I got the fuck out of Dodge because I was not in a good place. And it was at it, just leave. And it wasn't like I wanted to, but it was, my head went to a dark place real fast. And again, I was able to make a good decision. There was no reason for me to stay there anymore. I was in a dark spot and I was putting more into it. I was telling myself a different story about what had happened and what was happening than what had really happened, because this is a lifestyle for me. But if I had won that race, we're still sitting here. There's nothing different in my life. Like despite the metaphor, sometimes a race is just a race. But the end of the game, and I just want to reiterate, there is such a life without alcohol because you're no longer a slave to it. You know, Universal Studios is 2 hours away from me, and I am an absolute nerd for Halloween. And you know, it took me almost 10 years of living in Florida before I went to Halloween Horror Nights, because it didn't occur to me that you could go there and just not get too drunk to drive. It didn't occur to me you could just go there and not drink.
Yeah. You know, I love your just awareness of, if I'm triggered, I can get out of there. And thank you for clarifying that that's not for everyone, because some people can't be in the presence of alcohol, or at least where they're at in their recovery. So I appreciate you distinguishing between maybe what someone else can do and what works for you.
Yeah, and that is important too, because like I can't tell anyone else how to live. I just want them to know how they can live, and it is up to them. And my sobriety is too important to gamble with. So I was on my honeymoon, and my wife does not drink very much, but we were at like the pool area, and for some reason it was a scene that it crept up on me real fast. It was a place I needed to not be in, and she didn't know that yet. She hadn't seen that type of situation because we hadn't been together in the couple times where those things happen. And I'm trying to tell her, I was like, babe, I got to get out of here. And I'm like, Lisa, I need to leave this. And I was like, hey, here's your key. I'm leaving. And I just left. I'm like, my sobriety is too important to mess around. And if I don't protect number one, it really doesn't matter what number two is.
Wow. First of all, congratulations for being 10 years sober. That's incredible.
Almost 10 years, one day at a time.
Almost. Well, I am so curious because all the things that you're talking about, when I think about, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, aspects of, the suffering and the healing, talk to us a little bit about that, like the difference in physical healing through mental and spiritual healing.
So I thought about this earlier, and this is one of the questions because it is a kind of a unique, I like to say that physical endurance training is mental endurance training. If I'm going out, let's say this Saturday, I'm going to run for 2 hours, and it's probably going to be pretty cool out, which is nice. But let's say it's 95 or 103 degrees out, right? Like I'm going to be running 14 to 15-minute miles, and I'm going to be telling myself the entire time what a waste of time it is. But it's not, because it's about 2 hours of mentally training to stay the course. So it's like you're constantly training these things. And the physical stuff that I do includes the diet and exercise, like consistency of how you treat your body, what you put in it, like everything from when I wake and pray to how I take my coffee. Like these things all fuel the mental. But to answer your question, it's the other way for healing. You need to heal the spirit, you need to heal the mind, and the body will follow. If I have a perfectly healthy body, but my mind is just still in the cesspool, and my emotional sobriety isn't there, and my spirituality isn't there, I've had a healthy body before. I didn't do anything with it. And, my program of recovery is a spiritual program. And, but I still, it was a couple years into it till I was really able to connect the dots. And it was when I discovered box breathing, just a simple meditation technique, 5-second hold, 5-second breathing, like in, out, whatever. And I did that when I would stretch at night for 20 to 30 minutes. And all of a sudden, I just found myself in this meditative state. And I found this connection of mind, body, spirit right there through a simple stretching meditation routine. I'm able to say a prayer at the beginning of it because I do this at night. So I say my nightly prayer, and then I just get into the stretch. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you're fighting a heart rate or a mind that wants to do other things, but sometimes you really just kind of fall into the state, and the idea comes to you, and sometimes it's serenity. Sometimes it's the concept of what I need to do the next day. But I ignored, anything that needed to be healed emotionally for most of my life. And those scars, those open wounds, they're not going to heal themselves. And put it this way, bacteria is going to grow, and it is just going to create poison. And that poison is I'll put myself back to when I was not the best leader I could be. When you're sick, you are going to act sick.
Wow. That I love what you said around this. And I was so curious because I, have not been in the situations that you've been in, and I've had to rely very heavily on, my mindset, my spiritual practices, my prayer, meditation, all of that. So I was so curious, like, how you were going to even answer that question. So thank you so much. I know you're going to help a lot of our audience around that, that may be suffering in silence. So thank you.
I will say this, it's a process. It is a process, right? Because we're talking about things that happened in the past, but I didn't learn most of the stuff until recently, and that constant state of reflection, like the just deeper and deeper layers, just continuously opening yourself up and being willing to be more vulnerable. And the thing about healing is you have to admit that you've been hurt in order to heal. And that's a hard part.
It is. And this is why this show is so, like, I'm so in love with our guests, because I'm like, honestly, because it's so beautiful when you're able to share that you have been hurt and to put a voice behind, those things that we've all, kind of been through. And I think a lot of times when we ignore it or brush it under a rug, we do not only ourselves, but everyone we're trying to serve a disservice, from our families to our, friends to our community. So it is so important to put, shine a light on it, not just for you, but also to really be a guiding light, in a blueprint for someone else.
What you just said about how we're going to serve the others, that's a critical difference, because when we don't share, it's because we are concerned about what we will get from the other people. When we do share, we're focused on how we can give to the other people.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into my next question. This question is about shame. So shame is something that most of us struggle to manage or overcome. What did you do to help yourself overcome the shame of the person you used to be? And what do you do today when shame arises?
You can get ready for this one. I have no shame. None, period. I have no regret. And here's why. I had to go through everything I went through so I could sit here right now. And this is something I think about. And I've talked about this on a couple podcasts before, especially some business ones where I really have to dig into, leadership and office dynamics and stuff like that. And I was a good leader with a lot of bad qualities. And I definitely mistreated people. I fed my ego on the backs of others. And if I hadn't, I couldn't sit here and tell you that lesson now. And I just don't believe in, I can't change the past. And I am the result of everything that happened before. So now that said, am I occasionally remorseful? Like, do I feel good that I hurt people? Of course not. Right. I can't take it back, and I wouldn't, because I have to have gone through what I went through to get through now. So I'm not regretful about it. But yeah, of course, like, do I wish that that I had been better to others? Yes, but it's not shame. And I think it was helpful that even that incident in Vegas, like, only I was the only one in the hallway that day, but at least 500 people knew that I wasn't on stage the next day. At least 500 people knew that I got sent home. Like, there was nowhere for me to hide. And when something's just so publicly outed, it's kind of like my 8 Mile defense. If you remember the movie 8 Mile, the last battle rap scene there, when he just outs himself about everything the guy's going to say, that's kind of where I'm at right now. There's nothing to be shameful about, as long as I'm willing to be honest and use that to try to help other people.
Yeah. And I love your take on shame. And I always tell clients, you can't go back into a time machine and do it all over again. What you can do is use the past experience to inform how you live your life today and tomorrow. One
Shame
day.
is another self-manipulation, where it's another victim mindset. Like, we were the aggressors and somehow we turn ourselves into the victims. Oh, feel bad for me because I was a jerk and hurt a bunch of other people, and now I'm hurt. So let me feel guilty and remorseful, and everybody should feel sad for me.
Yeah.
That's
No,
kind of like when I quit drinking because everybody was annoying me.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. So, what strategies do you employ to overcome self-sabotage, fear, and excuses within yourself and your sales team?
All right. Self-sabotage is one of those ones that you have to be aware in the moment. So I'm going to bypass that one for a second. The way I get through fear is I don't have time for it. And I mean that. I don't have time for it. Like, I'm on the clock. I know exactly the moment that I will be bankrupt. So that's just a way of saying that I know what my mission is and my purpose is. And so from the moment I wake up, every step of my day is a predetermined, pre-blocked out step, and it's all towards something. So am I fearful of failing in business, losing my home, how the stress that could hurt my family? Of course, those moments coming in, right? I say a prayer in the morning. I ask God to take away my fear. And the rest of the times that throughout the course of the day, these things happen. If you've ever seen any of my content, any of my videos, I always start by saying, right here, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to me. I'm telling me right here, be present right now. This is what you're doing. Look here. When we're done here, I'm going to take my dogs for a little ride around the block. And then I'm going to open up my Franklin Covey binder that has my list made out for the day. And I'm just going to do the next thing because I don't have the ability to handle the idle time and complacency. And the same thing with excuses is I've set the plan. So I know I will fail if I only act in response to how I feel like acting, I'm going to fail. So in December, end of December, I reverse engineer my goals for the year. I have very specific and tangible goals for the first quarter. I'm going to do them. I'm tired. Well, let me go ahead and call Wells Fargo and see if they'll take that as a payment. No, don't accept being tired for mortgage payments. I guess I don't. I guess it's not a valid excuse. Oh, my blood sugar's been really stupid lately and just keeps bottoming out in the middle of doing anything. That's all right. I'm sure Chase Manhattan Bank won't mind if I don't make my credit card payments this month. Let me just tell them that my diabetes was acting up. No, they don't accept excuses as payments either. There's just no currency in it. Now, as far as self-sabotage is concerned, uh, I don't think I can prevent myself in the first sabotage. And I'll give you an example of something where I was talking to someone last week and I just feel like I made a really dumb comment, like something I shouldn't have said, something that just rookie sales mistake kind of 101 type of comment, right? Well, nothing I can do to take it back. But at the end of the day, when I spend just a few minutes on my inventory for the day, I was like, well, you know what? That was a mistake. If I recognize it, accept it, don't beat myself up over it, and I'm cognizant of it going forward, then I won't repeat it. But if I don't, and I want to sweep it under the rug and ignore it because I want to protect my ego, that is an act of self-sabotage.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you explaining about your videos when you say right here. I had a feeling just with your recovery and everything that it was a way to help yourself.
It literally just started as a practice of two things. Number one, I didn't know how to start my videos. I didn't want to be like, all right, everybody, like, I don't know if everybody's going to watch it or not anyway. And the second thing is I've been doing those for over a year before I really started making efforts to be a speaker. And I wasn't comfortable talking to camera.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, it's still something that you work on, right? But like, if you ever look, I see there's distractions, there's people, there's cars, there's dogs. I'm thinking about what people, and I just look at the camera. I said, right here. And I'm just telling myself, be present. That's it. Just be present.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I might even steal that because I never know how to start the videos, and I always feel like I do that high pitch hello, you know. So I need to totally like find something else. But I love that, just being so present, you know, right in the moment, right here. Love that. And you had so many great pearls of wisdom in what you just said. But one takeaway that I'm going to take is just the spending time on your inventory of the day. That is so good. I think a lot of times because we're on this hamster wheel and we're going, we don't take that time to spend on, you know, looking at our day or reflecting, you know. So, but again, you have to be right here to do that. So love that. You mentioned social media, telling viewers to unstuck yourself. Love that too. Can you give us some tools on how you help clients like unstick themselves?
Absolutely. I love this one. And so I actually have a couple examples in my head too, physical examples of something. Have you ever had a garbage disposal get blocked up?
Yep.
You got to take that little tool, stick it up there, right? And you just go and you move it just a little bit and it's unstuck. When
So
you're going to change a tire, right? Those bolts and stuff aren't meant to come off easy. But you don't have to make a big turn. It's a little turn and it becomes loose. How about when your shoelaces get all jacked up? Don't pull them tighter. Loosen it up, go the other way. We get stuck mentally. Our feet are in the sand. We're looking down the beach and saying, oh my God, how can I go 5 miles when my feet are stuck? And so we decide not to move. Pick your feet up. That's it. Take the next action. Move a muscle, change a thought. When you move if you walk for 5 feet, 5 feet forward, you have a different perspective of the world. Just like that. If you take a step up, one step, you have a different view of the world. And that's it. Like if I was jammed up with something, if I was doing like a mental, like, so on Fridays, I block up my afternoon and that's my creative time. Make sure I'm working on my book, make sure I'm working on videos and stuff. And if I'm like in a thing where I'm stuck in my head, I don't force it. I go walk the dogs. I go ride my bike for 20 minutes. I'll go to a coffee shop. I'll go to the beach. I'll go to a different room. Just change the scenery. Don't worry about the end game. Just take that first step. We just have to move the thing a quarter of a turn in order to get unstuck. And then it's a whole new level playing field right there.
So good. I love the analogies. I'm gonna definitely steal the shoelace one. I didn't even think about that
My
one.
garbage disposal broke this week, so that one was fresh
I
on
know. I was fresh in
my
your mind. Oh, good. That is so good. And the bolt, the tire bolt is so good too. And it really is true. It's like just those little movements, something I kind of coach my clients in doing. It's like I just try to get 1% better every day. I don't try and jump to 10%, 50, it's just 1%. It's really just one step. And in order to get to that 1%, I literally have to just make one small movement.
That-
So I love, love, love that you said that.
here's
You
one
also mentioned,
sorry.
yeah, no, you also mentioned the reverse engineering mind mastermind, or reverse engineering your mind. Can you walk us through your process for identifying and engaging with seven-figure accounts and crafting unique value propositions?
So I spent the last 20 years in logistics, most of those 20 years. So I'll try to put it in the context of that. But most people misunderstand their introduction as a value proposition. If you're saying the same thing as everybody else, you're not proposing value. You're advertising. This is an area of sales that I'm an absolute geek in. And these days it's really hard because people just simply don't engage with you as much as they used to. But the fact is, if you want to craft a good value proposition, if you want to pitch a great solution, ask better questions. That's it. That's the key. Run a podcast if you have to, but it is an interview. And it's about finding out, because people, if they knew how to fix their own problems, they wouldn't be on the phone with you. So we have to ask challenging, uncomfortable questions. Ask the information that is not available on the internet. Ask questions, ask questions, ask more questions, ask questions about those questions, ask the questions to questions. And you end up getting different dialogue, but you have to do some severe active listening. So when they tell you, yes, I'm annoyed with this, great, well, I can fix this, it's not enough, because they already know they have this problem. And if they knew how to fix it, or if they wanted to fix it, or if the pain was big enough to fix it, they would have fixed it. So we have to ask these other questions about, what is this impacting? What is this causing? I'll go back to even my drinking, right? I told you that I already knew there was a problem, but it was everybody else's problem. I wasn't prepared to fix it. But if you started asking me deeper questions about, things that I wasn't able to see yet, about how I was actually able to, how I was negatively impacting people, about how I wasn't a good employee, because that's not how a good employee behaves, how I wasn't a good friend to my boss, because that's not how a good friend takes advantage of a situation. If you ask someone enough questions to get their perspective, then you can give a true value proposition that is specific to them. And I call it fishing, because the fact is, if you have got three different service offerings, right? Those service offerings aren't going to change depending on how the person's answers. It's how you position it that's going to help them solve their problem. And that's creating value for somebody. The dangerous thing is, and this is okay though, if you offer it the right way, they don't need you to solve their problem. You just did. And that's why it's dangerous. But that's also why when they buy it from you, it's a customer for life. It's not a transaction, like, oh my God, yes, I did have this problem. I didn't realize the craters it was creating. Oh, and you can solve that problem for me. Great, thank you. And when you talk about seven-figure accounts, you have to go deep like that. Companies these days are so siloed that the person you're talking to does not know what's going on in three other departments. And they're not talking about it, right? And I'm also going to say this: sales, depending on the industries, you got truckloads of 23-year-old kids that they're bringing in here who are not equipped to have these conversations by themselves. And so it's just so surface level that they're not able to penetrate that. So it does take patience. It takes multiple conversations, and it takes confidence to know that you are an equal with the person you're talking to. I don't care what their title is, they're still engaged. If you have something to sell and value to offer somebody, good, your time is valuable. Don't apologize for being on the phone with somebody. Don't apologize for asking the challenging questions, because the way that you waste their time is by not asking the challenging questions.
Absolutely. Such great advice. I'm so glad you touched on so many things. Like, first and foremost, I believe we're all leaders. and it doesn't matter the title. And I think when, that is one thing that has served me my entire career, is that I went in as a leader, even as a junior person. And I've always like carried that ownership. And so I love that you say, like, it doesn't matter like who you're talking to, like your time is just as valuable as theirs. And then the questions are so important. I think it's really like peeling back, the layers,
Yep.
and for me, what I hate onions, they make me cry. So I use the analogy of a pomegranate, and I like to peel it back to get to the sweet spot of a person, and like what really is going on, and like what are they not thinking about, like that are challenges. Or like in your case, when you were like, if someone asked me really challenging questions around, like when I was an alcoholic, it's like all the people that I'm hurting, all the things, if people really touched on the sweet spot, got to the sweet spot of who you were, like you probably would have, taken a different road maybe, and it's the same thing with the client, like, or if you're on a sales call, or if you're, trying to sell someone something. So I love that you touched on the questions, because I think a lot of times when you think about young 23-year-olds and even how they interact just with their friends, it's very surface level, right? It's like,
Yeah, there's not
how
critical
they
thinking
send text
involved.
messages, it's like people are abbreviating in text messages, or not even speaking in complete sentences half the time, so I think like I love that you touch on that, and it's such a great, I can see that being so instrumental in organizations, not just in seven figure accounts, but really across all customers.
We used to run an exercise when I would be training a class, and I would say, okay, class, like, here's a situation. I'm a traveling salesperson, blah, blah, and my car sucks, right? Sell me a new car. Oh my God. It was a day exercise because, again, trying to get people to actually use their brains, that's the hard part. They resist doing it. Eventually, they're like, oh, what if it breaks down? Whatever. I don't care about my job. Like whatever they threw at me, I made it easy by saying, nope, don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care. And even though I don't have kids in real life, my character in this exercise did have kids. When somebody finally started asking questions about my child's safety, that's when I said, whoa, you're selling new cars? And the whole idea is that you just sold me 20 different ways that didn't work because I didn't care about those things. But that one was the one that's going to help me get there. Everyone has the thing. We just have to keep asking questions until we get there, the right questions, and not thinking with your wallet and not thinking with your life, to put yourself, to empathize, truly put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And even though you don't know, that, again, that's why it's questions. You can't assume that you know somebody. You just, here's what I think this might be. Let me ask some questions to validate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can equate that to what I do as a therapist is all day long. That's pretty much what I do, is ask questions and help empower people to come to their own solutions through those questions. And even if I ask a question that isn't the answer, we can now find what it is through what isn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to transition to your book. In the description, Through the Fire, you share that this isn't just a story about a drunk diabetic cancer patient who overcame adversity and became a mediocre middle-aged athlete. Can you share what your book is about in relation to the mental and spiritual approach to overcoming life's challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that line because, I like, it is about doing some badass epic stuff, but I really don't ever want to position myself as something other than a normal. There's nothing I do that you can't. Whoever else is listening, there is nothing that I do that you can't. I promise that. And so the book is not a bravado, machismo, here's all this badass stuff that I did. In fact, in the book, I talk about box breathing. I talk about the healthy choices. I talk about my relationship with God and beginning to say, beginning to pray, because I've always believed in God. I just didn't believe what God was good. It took me a long time to be able to forge that relationship. And I don't subscribe to any organized religion. I respect everyone else's thing, but I have my own relationship with God. And that was part of the spiritual approach. Also, the first hour of my day is usually where I do my warm-ups for my workout. And that is where I just consume. And I'm living on YouTube. And I'm either learning things on how to rehab whatever I broke, train my dog. Predominantly, though, I am listening to simply just motivational and aspirational type videos. So I'm consuming positive content that I can fire myself up throughout the rest of the course of the day. In the book, I talk about the power of journaling and how that's helped me not only with perspective, but it does start out, right? You start out by being like, well, I ran 3 miles, it was cold. And then, after a little while, you're like, well, I had things on my brain, but by the end of the run, I didn't have them on my brain anymore. You just do those acts, you begin to start to see things a little bit differently. But you also, and I talk about this in the book, winning, like what winning feels like. And I don't mean winning the game. I don't win these races. It's defying the things that you thought about yourself. I mentioned how the catalyst wasn't even really Adam asking me to do the race with him. It was the next day when I set the alarm for 5:15 a.m. to wake up before work to train, which in my life at that point was unheard of. That's not something I ever thought was possible. And with that simple act of waking up early to exercise, I woke up and I defied everything I previously believed about myself. So it is about taking inspired action to gain different perspective over your life, looking for the mental, looking for that spiritual, looking for the emotional, and also the social. Like nobody does this alone. I talk about community in the book as well. Like nobody does this by themselves. So it's not, I think I share like maybe 2 or 3 workouts on the whole book. And there might be a couple races I take people obstacle by obstacle, but for the most part, it's like, hey, we did this event. Here was the highlight, right? Because it's just about my journey of pushing myself through fear.
Yeah, that's so great. I want to ask you, if you could sum your book up in one word, what would that be?
It's badass, one word or two.
We can consider it one word if that's
No, I'm gonna say transformative.
cool. Love it.
I simply was not, even though I just told you I'm not the same person that I was then, I was not the same person at the end of the book than I was in the beginning of the book.
Right? We're always in an intermediate if you think about it, right? I'm not where I used to be and I'm not where I'm going.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, and I left this part out too. The mental aspect, the biggest takeaway, I think, was the fact that throughout that experience, I learned that mindset was a choice because there was an instance where I made that decision to no longer be a victim. I made a decision that I was going to thrive, that I was done surviving, that I was going to live a life that was going to surpass all the nonsense that had held me back. And so whether or not mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, like all those things, all those worlds just combined at one. And it wasn't like a me against the world moment, because when, again, if you're you against the world, you're a victim. It was just, no, I'm standing here. I'm standing right here.
Here.
And I am not going to be a victim anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, one thing that I'm so curious about, because it sounds like, you, even while you were going through all of these things, had incredible leadership, qualities, and then developed even more, by putting new tools on your tool belt and becoming, an even better leader later. What do you think, besides accountability, are some really great qualities in a leader?
You said besides accountability, but I'm going to touch on it anyway, because even in our when we were exchanging some comments about that chapter,
Yeah.
I don't think micromanagement needs to be such a bad word. I don't. And the reason being, and I love how your eyes went there, so let me explain. People are too afraid to manage. They're afraid to macro manage. So they don't manage at all. I would rather have somebody counting my finger clicks on a keyboard than ignoring me. I want my manager to support my goals, to help me. And if sometimes that means I got to put a thumb on me, so be it. Like, I want to succeed. My ego can handle it. That said, most micromanagers micromanage because they aren't macro managing. They're not actually doing the job. So instead, what they do, instead of doing their job, they focus on doing your job. And that's micromanagement of the worst kind. That said, I wish I had been more vulnerable and open. And here's the other thing too, ego deflection, because part of the reason that I wasn't able to be vulnerable is because I was defending my ego. Whereas now, if I had been more vulnerable, I would have had better discussions with my people. I also, if I had not let ego drive my relationships with some of them, the people who didn't like me, I would have cared less instead of pretending to care less. If they didn't like what they were told to do, I would have, not cared instead of wanted to force my will upon them, which is micromanagement of the worst kind. But over communicate, like, and this is why, again, a lot of leaders I think aren't communicating enough is because they aren't vulnerable, because also they're not empowered. Again, part of that chapter is management is in the worst position in most of these companies, especially these days where they're so remote. Managers weren't getting HR training, let alone manager training. And now that they're all working from remote, they're lucky if they get a log into Zoom. Senior leadership are saying, hey, here's the keys. Why aren't we succeeding yet? Like, what? So for the person in that role, I don't defend your ego. Communicate, be willing to not have everyone agree with you. And also remember, you're the boss. They don't have to agree. They don't have to like it. If they don't perform, go out of your way to help them perform and then get rid of them if they don't. Like, keep in mind when I say go out of your way to help them perform, because that's the manager's job. The manager's job is not to abdicate responsibility. I like saying that a salesperson in particular, should never be fired unless they know why, unless they see it coming. Like the managers just need to dig in. And a lot of times they won't do that because they don't want to do the grunt work anymore. And that's just bad leadership because they weren't told that. I remember a buddy of mine used to work for me. And he was like, man, I want to get into management one day, so I don't have to make cold calls anymore. I go, bro, the managers here make 8 times the amount of cold calls that you make. Like, they have 8 people on their team. How many cold calls do you think they're making? What do you think these guys are doing? Like, these aren't VPs. I'm the VP. I'm the one here with my sleeves rolled up, chilling in the office. Those guys are down there in the front lines. Like, it's the worst job in the company. But it's the role that, you begin to sharpen those leadership skills. So I think it's important that they are fully responsible and accountable, that they are not afraid to manage, even if it's errors on the side of micro, and that they are communicating effectively and openly. Last part, though, if I were to give advice for someone in that role, is never pass the buck. There's nothing worse than a manager says, hey, the boss says we have to do this. So, and then nobody will ever listen to that manager again, because they just basically said, I'm an empty shirt. I don't have any power. Some reason that I often had a target on my back from my subordinates because I carried the water for those who told me what to do. But that's the role. I don't have to agree with every decision that happened between me and my boss. My job is to execute the play, whether I like it or not. And that's just part of the job. It's why it's called a job.
Oh my gosh. So good. And I was so curious where you were going to go with the micro managing. So I'm sure you saw my reaction, but I couldn't agree more, because I think one of the things that is, I think a lot of times people don't really know who they are or what type of leader they are to begin with. And so not even knowing themselves makes it really challenging for them to be all those things that you listed, over communicate, be empowered, like be vulnerable, not pass the buck, so I think it's hard when they don't even know what type of leader they are. And I think some of the great leaders, at least that I've experienced, they are situational leaders, and I think every situation calls for different things, so I'm a cross between a transformational leader and a situational leader. And I kind of have to be in an HR role if you think about my role in HR. But I really do think that different, employees need different things. And so you as the manager need to be adaptable. That's one thing I'd add, is being able to adapt to the situation of what that person needs on that day, because guess what, they might need to be
Change the next day
because they're doing something new that they've never done before, but then on another day they're doing something that they can do in their sleep. So it's like you don't have to micromanage. So I think like getting comfortable, just having that adaptability is so key as well. So love all these things that you said. Thank you so much.
I had a guy working for me back in 2015. So I was, I don't know, 36 or something. He was probably 55. He's tenured, been around a long time, and he was falling on his face sales wise. Most people in my position would have let him sink or swim. I micromanaged the bejesus out of him. I put him on a 120-day plan that I couldn't believe he didn't quit because it was borderline insulting. But here's the deal. In 60 days, he got off the plan. And for the next 5 consecutive quarters, he was the number one rep in the company out of 200 sales reps, 5 quarters in a row in a growth segment. So, yeah, we had to get uncomfortable. I had to do something I didn't want to do. I didn't want to babysit and look on the damn thing, count how many phone calls he made, how many notes he put in, and nonsense like that. But that was the contract. That was it. I was willing to do what I didn't want to do to help him as long as he was willing to do what he didn't want to do. And boom, it worked and he crushed it. We didn't have to go back to that. So I cared enough to micromanage him. If I had to do it full time, I don't have time for that.
That is the key, is just caring about the person. And like so many times I see a lot of managers, they, even when they do care, they don't know how to really show up, and show that they care. And, so I don't want to take that away from them, because I do think a lot of managers do care, but I love how you were not afraid to get uncomfortable yourself, but then also help him get uncomfortable so then he could succeed.
Yeah. And it kind of goes to show what both of you were touching on, that you have to know yourself first in order to lead, that you have to be able to know your own wants, your own needs, your own self in order to effectively communicate those needs to other people. And people are drawn to confidence. It's attractive. And so when we truly believe in ourselves, people will be more willing to listen to ourselves. It's very hard to fake that level of confidence.
If we had had that same conversation in 2 years before we did, it would have been me just jumping his shit. That's it. It would have just been an aggressive, verbally abusive, probably not good conversation. Like I would have put him down thinking that it was going to get him to climb up. And then 2 years later, I was sober, and I still jumped his shit because it was, but it was a little bit different. Sorry, Benny. And, then used it as, okay, so now we're down here. Here's how we're going to get out of this together. And it was his choice at that moment, because he didn't have to, but he did. He crushed it. His success story, it made me feel good about it.
Well, that right there is a good leader. You said we, right? It's we instead of you or I.
Yeah.
It's a we, and you helped empower him rather than shaming him.
I might have done a little bit of the shaming too. Like I said, I'm a work in progress. But
I love your honesty. So shifting gears really quickly, here at Sunday SoulDay, we love to talk about the Sunday rituals or regular self-care routines that ground and fuel us for the week ahead. What do you do to take care of your mind, body, and soul?
All right. We're going to pretend it's Sunday, but Saturday is my soul day. And here's why. Because I get up early, I go for a long run. All right. But then I come back and I take the dogs to the dog park. And that, if you don't have dogs, you're missing a spiritual side of life. And who was it? Not Hemingway. Van Gogh. Van Gogh said, if you don't have a dog, at least one, there may not be something wrong with you, but there's something wrong with your life. And so I love that, because it just makes me happy. It makes me feel like a good dad, good dog dad. And then we come back and then I stretch. And my Saturday long run after that is like an hour to an hour and a half stretch, where I don't have pressing engagements and I just get to chill. And it's literally mind, body, spirit. Everything is accomplished and happy. I love those Saturdays. Like I love them. I look forward to them so much. And I do have one thing I like to do on Sundays, though, which helps me hit reset, is if I can, I will sleep in on Sundays. Like I don't usually sleep late, but I will sleep as late as I can. And that's just that's my reward for having done and achieved everything throughout the week. And I hit that reset. And, so that is important to me as part of my soul fuel.
I love that you said that you sleep in on Sundays, because there's a book I'm reading right now and talks all about everyone who gets up at 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. and how much they accomplish. And I think that's great, but I think it's also good to talk about a self-care tool being the idea of picking a day to sleep in and just rest the body.
Like if it weren't for, I'm out of this right now, but if I would like to get back into it. The second part of my Sunday is that would also be the day I eat cereal and watch Archer for an hour after I wake up. Like, I'm trying to avoid having just bowls of sugar for breakfast right now, but like,
Okay, what's your cereal of choice? Now we need to know.
Count Chocula. Oh yeah, that's not even a question. Count Chocula. all those the all the great leaders wake up at 2:30 in the morning. I've always wondered what time do they go to bed? Because I now I'm a 5 a.m. ish. I'm probably pushing back to about 4:30 wake up. But for the longest time, I was a 4 a.m. wake up too. But I'd go to bed at 10 o'clock. 6 hours is plenty for me. And that's why on the weekend I might get 8. Like, yay. But I wonder, I'm like, there's no way the most successful people in the world are sleeping 3 hours a night. I'm sorry, they're not. Like, there comes a point where you're going to have diminishing returns on that. And I went so much of my life without sleep. Anytime I come into a pinch on time, sleep is what goes. Everything from when I was a kid growing up, like, it just sleep is a thing that becomes less important. But even now I'm like, I can't live that way anymore. I need sleep for my physical activity. I need a certain amount of sleep for my mental acuity. And nobody's going to buy from grumpy. So like, there has to have some sort of rest involved.
No, yeah. And for me, the 6 hours is like, I can't get any less than that. So I used to operate off of less, but not very.
6 is good for consistency for me. If I can survive on 4, but not every day.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Well, I know you and I talked about different books that, were really helpful to you. Besides your book, what books would you recommend that have helped you along in your journey, whether it's as a leader or that really inspired you that you would love to share with our audience today?
I actually want to call
podcast too.
I want to call it a book I read a long time ago. I'm looking to see where it's on my shelf, but it was called Leadership and Self-Deception. Yeah, look it up. It was a game changer for me. And it gave an example of, it talked about the box, okay? Like putting people in a box. It's not, think outside the box. It's not like that. But let's say that I am used to Allie acting a certain way, okay? And now I'm going to assume, I'm putting her in this box, and I'm going to assume that Allie is going to act a certain way. How am I going to act towards Allie? I'm going to inspire the response from her that I'm already anticipating because I'm going to act that way. And so the book actually starts off by talking about a crawling baby who doesn't know they can crawl backwards yet or something. And they're like, so they hit a wall and they start crying and freaking out and not realizing that they can just take a step back. And it just helped me to realize that, like, people, if you think someone's a certain way and you act towards them based on that, you're going to create the monster that you don't want. And there's a lot more to the book, but like, that book really just started to open my eyes on how I was able to begin interacting with other people. I had a boss at the time who was very aggressive too, and the way that he would talk sometimes, I'd go into his office ready for a fight. Well, what do you think I got? And so I was like, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, I don't put thoughts into his head this time and see what happens. And we would always have a much more productive discussion. So I read that one a long time ago. The most recent book I read that had an impact was A Man Thinketh. A Man Thinketh. And so I highly recommend that one to anyone. And that one you could probably read 300 or 400 times.
Wow. Really great recommendations. I haven't read either of them, so I'm definitely going to pick them up.
A Man Thinketh, you could finish in about 20 minutes. Leadership and Self-Deception wasn't too long either, but I definitely, considering the topics of our discussion, I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good read.
Those sound like great books, and I haven't read them either. So I'm looking forward to reading both those books. And I totally understand that idea of like the reputation one creates and then that dynamic between the two. So it sounds fascinating. Nick, this has been an incredible interview. You gave us so many gems and so many tools. I'm so excited to read your book. I'm so excited for our audience to read your book. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Really well said. And I heard the story twice about your journey, and it still was just remarkable. And you're just such an extraordinary person. I'm so glad that the universe worked in our favor and we crossed paths, and that we were able to share your journey with our audience and all of your, what I like to call gems, your pearls of wisdom, which were just incredible. As well as, your book, and really looking forward to the second book as well. So, so excited about that one as well. And can't wait to read that. So, really appreciate you blessing Sunday SoulDay.
Thank you again for having me. This has been awesome.
Absolutely.
Feeling better already.
I love it. Well, you fueled our soul, and hopefully you fueled yours too, audience. And we'd love for you to put in the comments one takeaway that you took from this extraordinary interview. Everyone, have a blessed Sunday. Bye.